Necromancer Grip. Hi, Limit Break Overdrive with another Path of Exile build guide. This time it is the Boneshatter Juggernaut, the same build I did in last league. Now I have updated it for the current patch notes because there's a few changes that I'm gonna go through soon. But first, I want to go and show how I made the guide. Basically, there's skill trees for every 10 skill points you're getting. And I actually mention when you have to respect or can respect. For example, at around Merc Lab, you can respect like this node to get these two because it's slightly more damage, but you don't have to, you can wait later. And for the endgame tree, there are 6 points you need to respect. These two and the mana reservation things, so you can take other nodes, but it's pretty clear. I have other trees as well for expensive stuff and so on, but I'm gonna go into that a little bit later once I go to the item side of things. So, but basically, Jug endgame is the tree you should be looking at for up until you're getting to red maps, basically, because I stop at level 93. If you go higher level, I have another thing for that, because I got up to level 95 this league with this build, and it was pretty smooth. Then there's a reason, like this part of the tree, I tend to go early, and there's a reason for that. I believe it is at around, right after normal lab or around there. I go and take these notes at the start. First, this one gives accuracy, which is good because we're gonna go crit later, but the biggest reason is these dexterity notes, because I feel that at around this time in the game I tend to lack dexterity to keep leveling precision up, so that's why I do it in this order. And yeah, the respec I talked about, it's 6 points, it's right at the end game or when you want really, and you get at least those 6 respec points from just doing the quests, so it's not even costing any regrets. As for the Pantheons, I go with Brine King and I upgrade it to get cannot be frozen. You can upgrade everything if you want to, it's not bad. I mean, reduced effect of chill is maybe useful this league because of the jewel changes, but I just get chill immune on my boot usually, and I take Tukohama for the regen while stationary and the fizz reduction up to a maximum of 9, because every fizz damage we can mitigate is regenerated as life to a certain degree, so it's synergizing well with our build. I also want to take the time to show you the notes section. I tried to put a lot of notes like this. I added afterwards because a lot of people didn't know why I was using, I believe is this, which gives 30% increased damage while in blood stance and without any stance skills. You don't need to because you're in blood stance by default, so you can just take that and it's 30% increased damage for free. But yeah, I have a section about weapons, skills, and so on, and one for the early leveling process, like what gem to get and when, and the links at the end of Act 1, and so on. There is one change in that, and it's that now we're picking up Ancestral Cry, which brings me to the Tribal, Tribal Fury changes this node. Now it gives Strike an additional enemy, and the Mastery we were taking was giving you strike skills which target additional enemies can do so from 30% further away, which were giving us like a good amount of range. But now this is gone. Instead, this gives splash damage and the additional enemy targeted is a mastery. And we don't need splash damage with Boneshatter because we already get that when we stun enemies, so it's a bit of a waste. So instead, I save these 5 points. I spend 1 in Call to Arms to get instant war cries, and if I switch to game, I put Ancestral Cry on mouse button 1 and I walk. Then I can whack And yes, not every single of your attacks will be empowered by Ancestral Cry, but a lot of them, and you can just place land around and whatnot. And this, what it does, is that it gives you target 2 additional enemies. And if you get power, let's say there are enemies close to you and you get power, it gives you more armor and more strike range, which kind of solves the problem, because I don't believe it was a problem, especially the way I play the build, because I use close combat, so I tend to always be close when I whack shit. So to me, it doesn't make any difference, but sometimes you're a little bit farther away, so taking Ancestral Cry will mitigate that to a certain degree. So these are the main changes that I had to do for the build. So instead of that, I pick up Call to Arms, as I just said, and I pick up Prismatic Skin, like always, not just depending on the situation. And I like Cloud and Chain, and the reason for that is to give us more armor, and it's giving like 16% to all res, which I mean gives us some leeway with resistances on our gear. And before talking about the gear specifically, I want to talk about the skill gems, because again, since we're using Ancestral Cry and our gem sockets were full, I had to make a decision, and I was 5 head. I just leave the decision up to you. Basically, I use Vengeance, and I like using Vengeance to get rage, additional rage, because every time we attack an enemy, we hit ourselves. So every time we hit ourselves, Vengeance can trigger. So you can get rage even faster, and life gain on hit is something I really like to do, because it's just more life regen, basically. But now, we need to either ditch rage or life gain on hit to make room for Ancestral Cry. I did some testing, but not exhaustive. Like, I played a few maps, and I prefer keeping rage. So that's the choice I would make, but if you feel like life gain on hit is better, you can still do that. You will just get fewer rage, or rage less faster, which means you won't be using Berserk as much. I like to use Berserk against bosses. Like, you can see the amount of damage it's giving us, like 2 million damage. It's for a short period of time, but it's a pretty good damage burst against bosses, especially when you have Calling Strike, like in this build. You can just whack a boss at the end to try and kill it before another phase, for example. So it's pretty good. Let me look at my notes. Yeah, alternate quality. If you are lucky, or if you're playing trade, you can get Divergent Boneshatter, which would give like 200,000 damage more just by having it. You take more physical damage, but you get increased attack speed per trauma stacks, which in turn allows you to get even more trauma stacks. And even without it, I can safely be at around 30 trauma stacks, like almost always like 25, 30. And I take only 15 into account just to make an average damage thing. So I'm not like cranking up and checking every boxes to increase this damage number. It's pretty much... The only thing you could argue is that you don't always have 55 rage, but it's not the end of the world. Let's say we put like 25, we're about at 4 mil, so... But yeah, I usually keep 55 rage all the way. I don't use Berserk unless I have trouble, for example, with an essence monster or a certain boss, but most of the times I don't. Another one you can get Divergent version 4 is Precision. It's not that big of a deal, don't go out of your way to get it, but Divergent gives you 2% increased damage, which is 10k. It's not the end of the world. I happen to get it, and it's level 14 because of dexterity requirement. If you have enough dex, you can keep leveling this up, it's gonna be more damage. Alright, so I have a few gear sets. Basically, the Brass Dome version is the same as basic mapping, but with a Brass Dome, which makes you lose like 800 to 1000 life, because Brass Dome has 0 life. But it gives us like 4k armor, which is double thanks to Disascendancy. Armor received from body armor is double, which gives us a shit ton of armor. And of course, if you use Brass Dome, it needs to be like divine to +5 or max res. And if you look at our max res, they're pretty high, and this synergizes with this even more. so we're pretty tanky. Of course, this is not required at all. I never used it because I never got one in SSF. You can just use the standard Glorious Plate. Glorious Plate have a lot of armors as well. The armor is important, again, for our defenses. What gear is basically life, resist, armor, and attack speed when you can. The only item that is really damage focused now is the amulet. First you get Titanic Impacts, which is the Anoint, so you can get that on any amulet. And you get Crit Multi and Crit Chance. This league I was lucky, I found a Fractured Crit Multiplier, I think it was tier 2, so it was easier to craft. This one is harder to craft, but you can go with just one or the other, obviously, and slowly work towards that. The Vermilion Ring is what I prefer, but you can use one that gives you Chaos Res as an implicit. It's still good, but the more life I get, the better. And attack speed you can get onto that, but life, resist, and I added intelligence, and you don't need to get this ring specifically, which I used in both slots. It's just filler stats, basically. Intelligence will be useful if you want to use Assassin's Mark, which I prefer over Poacher's Mark, because we get 0 intelligence from the 3. So it's kind of hard to run. I managed to do it, not at level 20, I think it was level 18, but Poacher's Mark is basically the same amount of damage, but it's fizz damage instead of focusing on crit. The reason I prefer Assassin's Mark is because of the other piece of gear I want to talk about, and it's the Flasks. Because on every Flasks I can, maybe not the Life Flask, but the others, I get chance to gain a Flask charge when you deal a crit. So the more you crit, the more Flasks charges you gain, so the more uptime you get on those, and they're pretty good. Basalt to get more armor, as well as Grenade. Diamond Flask for crit chance. And Silver for Onslaught, or Sulfur for Consecrated Ground and damage. You can change for whatever you prefer. I prefer Silver Flasks. And as for the stats on the Flasks themselves, increased armor, increased crit chance, attack speed, and whatever I got, like reduced curse effect, doesn't matter. And you cannot get, for example, increased armor on this one and increased armor on this one. Only the highest of the two will work. They don't stack as a suffix, so only one suffix of each can work. Other than that, Jewel with Mana Leech on it. This is how I get the Mana Leech on the build. The sooner you get that, the better. And the Helmet Enchant. This is the one I would prefer because you get more trauma stack, which is more damage. But I mean, I'm in SSF and I never get any Helmet Enchant because I hate running labs. But Boneshatter damage would be nice. Pride or any skill mana reservation would be nice. It's no problem. I mean, if something works for you, get it. If you're in trade, I would strive to get this one. I feel it's the best of the enchant for the skill. And I don't think there's... oh yeah, there's... when I say basic mapping, it's not really basic gear. It's pretty strong gear, but it's like the base stats you want to aim for. That's why I call it basic. Expensive stuff is not necessarily the best gear set. It's just like example of stats you can get that are good on your build. For example, these boots are dual influence because I didn't want to make another gear set. So you can get Tailwind for Hunter and max endurance charges with Warlord. So these are stats you can get. You can get only one of those. Doesn't have to be awakened and all. With an awakened orb, it's just again an example of stats. Marble Amulet would be the preferred implicit, I believe, because of life regen, because we already regen a lot. And then I made it Warlord influence for increased damage per endurance charge. So these are just examples. You really need to focus on this gear set, and then you can look into the other items if you need ideas. Which brings me to custom modifiers. These are some of the modifiers you can get from Eldritch Implicit. They are not active, and the reason I put them there is sometimes you don't know if this is good, how much damage it does, so you can add it there and just erase the space and you see the damage changing. So this would give us like, what, 140k damage. This one is Curse Effect. I'm not sure if it's still gonna be there, but if it is, oh, 200k. 10% increased attack speed. Okay, so you know how much damage they give, because if you go back to the notes, right at the bottom, I have a list of good implicits for the build, like for body armor, gloves, boots, helmet. So you can either go for that or go for influenced items in this gear set. So you have like pretty much everything you need, depending on what you find, because this is aimed at SSF, so that's why there's no like real path, because in SSF you just go with what you find basically. And I've got a lot of notes. Why a Flesh Ripper? Just for the implicit, because we're crit with axes, which is not the easiest way to scale crit, but it's the way you can get the most damage, even compared to Resolute technique or Precise technique. This is what gave me the most damage when I made the build, so that's why I have, like, if you can get a Shaper one with the 20% more damage, yeah, one can dream, but this is again another option. And that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about for the gear. So, oh, I have one more note for the skill gems. Why Fortify as a skill gem instead of Fortify on hit on the tree with the mastery? And reason is that I believe it just gives us more damage. Because if you change this one and add, I don't know, Malefiz, for example, it's gonna give you a certain amount of damage, but in turn you need to sacrifice like 5 skill points to get Fortify on hit. And I don't know where I would like take these points. You probably have to sacrifice some damage, and all in all you get more damage with the support gem, I believe, so that's why I use it. And it's also easier to get. You get it like pretty early on, and I mean it's just simpler in my opinion, and again more damage. So I believe this is all I wanted to talk about. Like, the TLDR is we don't take this wheel now because Tribal Fury got changed. I changed a little bit how the leveling process worked, but overall the build is the same, the items are the same, and I believe it's still gonna be pretty good. So let me know down in the comments if you tried the build last league, and if you're gonna play it this league, if you liked it or not. I want to know, what would you like me to add or remove from the guides? Let me know down in the comments. The best I can become, the better I want to keep improving and making other guides. I'm gonna be looking into other skills. I'm not sure I'm gonna have the time to make another build, but if I can, sure thing, I'm gonna be publishing that. So thanks for watching, and I'm gonna be seeing you in the next video. Have a good one.